A team of explorers finds ancient cave paintings that point to the stars and set off to find where humans really came from. They travel to a distant moon, hoping to meet our creators, but instead, they find mysterious structures and dangerous secrets. What are these strange buildings? And what's inside them? Dive into this recap to see how their search for answers turns into a fight for survival. Will they make it back safely? What will they unleash in their quest?
So no response.
I'm sorry, no.
Maybe they didn't understand it.
The film begins by showing us an unspoiled land. Then we see the shadow of a flying object approaching a waterfall. This oval-shaped object can be seen flying over the cliff. A hooded humanoid approaches the edge of the waterfall. He looks at the oval craft with disdain, then places what seems to be a plaque with hieroglyphics on it on the ground. He then removes his clothes and picks up the plaque. He opens it and a strange black liquid is seen inside. The humanoid decides to drink it all. As he does so, the ship leaves and he just waits for something to happen. A few seconds later, he writhes in pain, and his body begins to disintegrate. As we watch his arm and all parts of his body turn dark, we get closer and closer until we see the humanoid's DNA being destroyed, slowly disintegrating. He tries to hold on to his arm, but it breaks off and falls into the waterfall, spraying this black substance all over the water, and we watch a new DNA sequence begins to form. We go to the future, precisely in 2089. We first meet Elizabeth Shaw and Charlie Halloway, who are in charge of an archaeological team in Scotland. They have discovered a cave that is 35,000 years old and have found something extraordinary in it, various cave paintings. They can see a map of the stars, pointing to the possible creators of mankind. Trying to interpret the paintings, Elizabeth says they probably want us to look for them. In the near future, exactly in 2093, we see a scientific exploratory vessel called Prometheus, apparently far from Earth, its destination not revealed. Inside we see David, an android, inspecting the bodies of the crew as they sleep in cryogenics. He can see their dreams and gives a glimpse of Elizabeth's dream. She seems to be with her father on Earth. She witnesses some kind of ritual before a dead person is buried. We see that her mother is dead and that her father has been looking after her. We then see David checking the ship for faults, practicing and studying different languages, and perfecting his phonetics. David also spends time watching films, and often repeating the lines of the characters. Suddenly, he notices something strange on the ship and an alarm sounds, announcing that they have arrived at their destination. He decides to open the hatch of the ship and sees a strange moon, which seems to be their destination. Then, we see Mission Director Meredith Vickers. David finds her exercising and informs her that it has been 2 years since they left Earth. He also mentions that no one has died. The director then orders David to wake up all the crew. Elizabeth and Holloway are among the crew who have just woken up. Later in the meal, we meet various characters such as the captain of the ship, named Yannick, and other scientists who have agreed to go to this strange planet. They seem to know absolutely nothing about the mission, and some mention that they are only there for the money. During the crew briefing, they are shown a holographic video of the owner of the company that funded the mission, Peter Wayland. He tells them that he is recording the message in 2081 and if they watch it, they have reached their destination and he is dead. He also mentions that David is the closest thing he has to his son, but unfortunately, he is not human. The director is annoyed at the mention of David, and Mr. Wayland also mentions that David can never have a soul. He says he has spent his whole life trying to answer questions such as where we come from, our purpose, and what happens when we die. Fortunately, he has found 2 people who have convinced him to answer them, Elizabeth and Holloway. Finally, Mr. Wayland mentions that the Titan Prometheus wanted humanity to be equal to the gods, and that is why he was banished from Olympus, hinting at why the ship is named after him. The holographic presentation ends and the doctors go on to explain what they will be doing on the planet. They are shown pictures of archaeological excavations from around the world. All the different civilizations have made cave paintings showing giant beings pointing to the sky, and the only galactic system that matches is the one they have just arrived in. They also explain that this solar system is similar to our own, with a planet and a moon capable of supporting life. But the other scientists are skeptical. Elizabeth mentions that they have called these giant beings engineers and believe that they have designed humans. Later, Elizabeth and Holloway meet Vickers in her room, a separate module with its own independent life support system. She also has a very rare and expensive medical capsule capable of various types of surgery. She is skeptical about the mission, believing that the engineers are just the scribblings of ancient men who lived in dingy caves. But she points out that if she is wrong, they will not be able to contact any life forms, they will have to report to her first. Vickers defends himself by saying that his company is funding the mission, so they are just employees. Later, the doctors talk to David and he replies that after 2 years of studying dozens of ancient languages, he believes he will be able to communicate with the engineers if they find them. The ship then moves toward the moon's surface. There appears to be a severe storm, but as they move further into the atmosphere, they notice that the surface seems to show no signs of life. Holloway spots unnatural pyramid-like structures, so Captain Yannick lands near the structures and an inspection team leaves the ship in spacesuits. They drive up to some sort of structure, with Yannick able to monitor their progress from the ship through the cameras on the crew's helmets. As they get closer to the structure, everyone seems surprised. Fifield, a scientist on the mission, sends out devices to scan and map the interior. They then reach a humid area when they discover that the atmosphere inside the structure is breathable. Holloway is the first in removing his helmet and then everyone follows him. David inspects some symbols on the wall, which are covered in a strange goo. When David runs his finger over them, the symbols light up. This activates a holographic representation of large alien figures running toward a part of the ship. The team inspects the area and finds the remains of an alien, decapitated by a door. David reads the alien language on the door, but Fifield is very nervous, so he and Milburn, another scientist, decide to return to the ship together. Elizabeth analyzes the body and finds that it has been dead for over 2,000 years. David then manages to open the door, where they find many alien murals and a giant head thought to be one of the engineers. In that dank chamber, they also find hundreds of cylinder-like artifacts and a statue of a humanoid head. Elizabeth tells everyone not to touch anything while David examines some cylinders containing a black liquid. However, he touches them to observe their texture. The cylinders begin leaking this dark fluid due to the change in temperature or atmosphere when the chamber was opened. At that moment, the Prometheus captain informs that a silica storm is approaching fastly, what forces the crew to return to the ship. While Elizabeth and Holloway manage to get the giant alien head, David disobeys Elizabeth's orders and takes one of the mysterious cylinders with dark fluids. After becoming lost trying to find the way out, Fifield and Milburn, the remaining crew members, are stranded in the pyramid structure. When they are almost on the ship, the engineer's head falls, so Elizabeth, without a second thought, jumps off the Prometheus in an attempt to take it back. Holloway comes to her rescue but ends up making things worse. Just as they are about to die in the storm, David rescues the couple as they are thrown from the cargo platform. On board the ship, Shaw and medic Ford carefully study the engineer's head, assisted by David as they remove the helmet. To their astonishment, they find that the engineer's DNA is an exact match to that of the human race. As they find new cells growing in the head, the scientists briefly revive the head using an electrified needle to stimulate the nervous system. The engineer seems to react to the stimulus but winces in pain, so they try to reduce the stimulation. Unfortunately, the head rapidly decomposes and explodes. After that, David is next to what looks like a cryogenic capsule. We don't know who is the person inside, but David says he will be in charge of everything. Leaving that section of the ship, he bumps into Vickers, who asks David what the person said. David replies he was told to try harder, but Vickers seems upset with him and his answer. Later, David examines the cylinder and makes a significant discovery. Within it, there are numerous vials containing a mysterious, thick black liquid. After that, David meets Holloway and they discuss the meaning of life. Holloway says he wants to know why the engineers, who are supposed to be our creators, gave birth to human beings. In the same vein, David questions why he was created by man, to which Holloway replies just because they can. Then, David asks Holloway what is he willing to do in order to find answers. Holloway claims he would do anything. David proposes to raise a toast to celebrate their discovery, and Holloway agrees. However, David intentionally infects Holloway with the substance he found within the cylinder, hiding it in a drop of liquid on his finger and briefly dipping it into the glass of champagne Holloway drinks. Back inside the structure, Fifield and Milburn continue to investigate. When they find more alien dead bodies, Yannick detects a living form in one section of the pyramid and warns them. Yannick assures that it's all about a glitch, but Fifield and Milburn, terrified, decide to move the opposite way. Later, Elizabeth and Holloway are alone in their module. Holloway mentions how easy it is to create life, but Elizabeth feels uncomfortable with this statement. As she is infertile, she is unable to create life. Holloway apologizes for having said that, and then Elizabeth and him have an intimate moment. Back in the captain's cabin, Vickers finds Yannick. They flirt for a while and arrange a meeting at Vickers' module in 10 minutes. Right after that, Fifield and Milburn see a strange, serpentine creature emerging from a pool of black liquid that has leaked from the cylinders. When Milburn tries to examine the creature, it quickly wraps itself around his arm, breaking it instantly. When Fifield tries to cut it off, a corrosive yellow acidic fluid from the creature melts Fifield's helmet, exposing him to the dark liquid leaking from the cylinders. The creature then enters his suit and forces itself down his throat. As Yannick was with Vickers, no one knows about this. The next day, Holloway looks in the mirror and sees that his eyes have changed. They are inflamed and he sees a small, worm organism emerging from one of his eyes. After the storm has passed, Yannick informs the crew that he has been unable to contact Fifield and Milburn. Therefore, the Prometheus crew returns to the structure and David drives a vehicle to another location on the pretext of repairing one of the scanning devices used to map the pyramid. Vickers knows David is up to something and orders him to transmit what he sees inside. David finds thousands of cylinders and more engineers, but when he arrives at what appears to be a control room, he deliberately cuts off the transmission signal. Once inside, David operates a control panel and activates more holographic images of the engineers. David finds a map of the galaxy and realizes that Earth was the engineer's destination. However, his most important discovery is a capsule with a living engineer inside. David assumes it is alive because he can hear its heart beating, but it appears to be in hibernation, waiting to be awakened. Back with the crew, they find the cylinders in the dank chamber leaking the dark fluid in Milburn's body. It is there that the crew sees the serpentine creature entering the fluids. However, Holloway's infection quickly spreads to his body and he is brought back to the ship. Since he gets worse, Vickers refuses to let him on board, claiming he is under quarantine protocols. Holloway then decides to sacrifice himself, and when he approaches Vickers and begs her to kill him, she burns him to death with a flamethrower. Elizabeth cries in pain and is heartbroken. Next, we see Elizabeth being awakened by David. The android reveals that Elizabeth has undergone a medical scan which has revealed that she is pregnant. Elizabeth is surprised and confused as she is sterile, but is terrified when David informs her that she is 3 months pregnant. David tells her that might be because she and Holloway intimated while he was infected. David takes the cross her father gave her, saying that it could be contaminated, and says that the only option is to put Elizabeth in cryogenesis and send her back to Earth. At that moment, Elizabeth feels a sharp pain in her abdomen, so David sedates her, and while she is falling asleep he tells he had spied on her dreams. However, Elizabeth pretends to be asleep to escape and use the automated medical surgery capsule in Vickers' quarters to extract the fetus. Once the operation is done, it turns out that the fetus is a horrific cephalopod creature. Elizabeth leaves the creature locked in the medical capsule and heads to a different room on the ship. In this place, Elizabeth finds David and Mr. Wayland, who was presumed dead. Wayland has been hibernating aboard the ship. It's then revealed that Vickers is Wayland's daughter, and he explains to Elizabeth that he has a few days of life left. At this moment, Elizabeth is told that David has found an engineer alive, and Wayland says he intends to ask the engineers to help him avoid his imminent death. Meanwhile, Yannick detects that Fifield's camera is activated. Some members of the crew go outside and discover a mutated Fifield who attacks and kills several of them. However, Yannick succeeds in killing him with a flamethrower. Later, Yannick meets Elizabeth, who is getting ready to return to the pyramid. Yannick explains to her that he thinks that the moon they are on was used by the engineers as a military base until they lost control of their biological weapons, referring to the cylinders and the black fluid. Elizabeth asks Yannick if he is not curious about what the engineers may say about humans' existence, but Yannick says he doesn't care at all. He is fed up with all this and promises that whatever they find in the pyramid, he won't let it get on the ship. The rest of the crew return to the structure and awaken the engineer. At the same time, in Prometheus, Yannick discovers that that section of the pyramid is actually a spaceship. Inside the pyramid, David speaks to the engineer in an alien language, asking him why they created mankind and begging him to prolong the life of his creator, Mr. Wayland. The engineer responds by ripping David's head off and killing Wayland. Elizabeth escapes from the alien ship as it is activated by the engineer. Although she makes her way out, he is not fast enough to reboard the Prometheus. Despite his decapitation, David is still active. The android suggests that the engineer will release the vials of black liquid on Earth, killing every living thing on the planet. Knowing this, Vickers orders Yannick to return to Earth, but Elizabeth convinces him to stop the engineer's ship. Otherwise, they would have nowhere to go. Yannick is confused, claiming that the Prometheus is not a combat ship, so it will be difficult to stop the engineer's ship. Then he realizes that they might try to stop the ship by crashing it. Yannick tells Vickers to flee in an escape pod, and Vickers reluctantly agrees. Yannick and his 2 surviving crewmen take off and crash the Prometheus into the engineer ship. The crippled engineer ship crashes on the planet, but Vickers and Elizabeth are still there. Elizabeth manages to escape and the spaceship falls on Vickers, crushing her. The ship continues to fall, but despite being underneath it, Elizabeth barely escapes, as a giant rock prevents her from being crushed. Elizabeth is running out of oxygen, so she heads to the escape pod to retrieve supplies. She barely arrives at it and finds that the creature she has taken off her body is still alive. What's even worse, the alien offspring has grown to a gigantic size and has an uncontrollable urge to kill. At that time, warned by David, Elizabeth learns that the engineer has survived the crash. Suddenly, the engineer enters the escape pod and attacks Elizabeth, but, in a fast movement, she releases the tentacled creature. Both the engineer and the tentacled creature get into a fight. The creature subdues the engineer, who finally shoves a tentacle down his throat and kills him. Elizabeth gets out of the escape pod. Lying on the floor, she cries and believes she is stranded on the planet until David contacts her. David tells her that there are more of the engineer's ships elsewhere on the planet and he is able to pilot them. Therefore, Elizabeth drives to the pyramid and recovers David's remains from the alien ship. Once with David, Elizabeth takes back the cross David had taken from her, and together they travel to and activate another engineer ship. Elizabeth and the remaining pieces of David then take off to travel to the engineer's homeworld in an attempt to understand why they created humanity and why they later attempted to destroy it. On their way to the engineer's planet, Elizabeth sends a message to Earth, telling them not to go back to where the Prometheus landed because there will find only death. In the last scene, we see a creature emerging from the dead engineer's chest, creating what we will be later known as the alien.